Winter deer feeding in Maine. How much is it costing our deer herd? I put this study together, did some research, talked to many people regarding winter deer feeding, and my personal opinion, as the opinion of many other people I know, that people that are feeding deer, whether it's large operations or small people in their own backyard, are causing more harm than they're helping with the deer. Living on the edge. Winter feeding of deer. What you should know. When it comes to winter feeding of deer in Maine, the adage might be, if you care, let them fend for themselves. Despite a sincere concern for wild deer, many people will do more harm than good and may be killing deer with kindness. Remember, just because deer will eat a food provided by humans in winter does not mean that it is good for them. 3 main factors that impact winter survival: winter severity, body condition going into the winter as determined by the availability of high-quality foods in the summer and fall, and adequate softwood cover in the winter. This info was taken from the brochure that IF&W released on winter feeding of deer. This photo shows, you can see the beaten trails. There were hay and potatoes left for the deer, which caused malnutrition, starvation, and death. Many deer congregated to this site, as shown by the paths. In recent years, there have been more than 60 deer killed adjacent to this site from vehicle collisions as they leave the softwood cover and travel across a state road. IF&W on winter feeding of deer. Winter feeding is discouraged by the department as it draws deer near roads where they are vulnerable to vehicle collisions, causes malnutrition, and or increases exposure to coyote and free-roaming dog predation and to disease. If you feed wild deer in Maine, please consider phasing out this practice as soon as possible. It is difficult for me to find a large concentration of deer wintering that are not influenced by artificial feeding. When we fly over our deer herd, they concentrate almost exclusively where there is artificial feeding, said state biologist Doug Kane from Greenville. The IF&W Deer Collaring Project started in 2015. They, up to the date of this, which was 2018, they had handled 266 deer, placed 149 radio collars, observed mortality rates in 3 different wildlife management districts, Zone 1, Zone 6, and Zone 17. It shows the leading causes of death in Zone 1 are coyote predation, malnutrition, roadkill and hunter harvest in Zone 6, roadkill, coyote predation, and hunter harvest in 17. These mortalities were from all study years combined so far from all the times of the year, just in Wildlife Management District 17. Sample sizes are still too low to draw any statistically valid conclusions, but we're beginning to see which causes of mortality are likely most common in 17. As you can see, hunter harvest, 38%, deer vehicle collision, 24%, and then you've got the little wedges, wounding loss, predation, the smaller things. And in note, the deer car collisions, the majority of those roadkills were during the winter months. Radio collared deer data points in the Dexter area from winter 2017-2018. These yellow circles are GPS radio ping every 12 hours. It shows several does in the area where they're hanging out. As you can see, along Route 23, along the edge of the lake in areas. These are the known deer feeding areas in Dexter between 2003 and 2019, depicted by the deer heads. The red dots on the map are known deer crossings in the winter. 15 to 20 years ago, deer did not winter in these areas. Winter feeding has caused them to change their wintering areas, putting them closer to roads and causing them to cross the roads in order to travel between feeding areas. The Maine DOT crash query tool. This is the Dexter deer car crashes from 2003 to 2018. As you can see, the yellow areas are the higher numbers of kills once they get into the double digits. Many others are in the blue. You note that area. Here's a side-by-side look at the winter feeding areas and the crash locations. So if you look at that, you can see that the majority of the higher impact are near winter deer feeding locations. Back on the roadkill totals, I did these 3 maps in 5-year intervals, showing that over time, more deer are getting hit because more deer are using the feeding sites, because a doe will have, on average, 2 fawns each year. If she survives to the next year and those survive, they come back. But there are many that don't survive and don't return. Let's look at neighboring Sangerville, further north on Route 23. In a 6-mile stretch of road, you can see those numbers are astronomical over time, and there are many feeding locations along that route. These are the higher crash areas compared to the maps on the right, where there are known winter deer feeding areas. As you can see, the higher locations indicated, they kind of correlate right there along with the map. The blue dot on this map shows a winter deer location prior to the individual first starting to feed deer back in 2003, 2005. His home is located at that blue dot. In 2005, 2009, he started to feed the deer. And as you see, the deer car crash rates have started to increase. From 2010 to 2013, around this location, more deer car crashes. Same location, 2014, 2016. And from 2017 to 2019, no deer car crashes. The individual passed away in 2017 and was no longer feeding deer, proving that stopping winter deer feeding will prevent many deer car collisions. 71% of the total reported deer car crashes on Route 23 in Sangerville were during the winter months, as you can see from these reports. Note on the bottom, the 2 yellow indicated ones were actually bodily injury caused to the people. The winter of 2018-2019, this one feeding location on Route 23 in Sangerville had 7 known deer kills as of March 23, 2019. Less than half of those road kills were reported. It is important to note that the Maine DOT crash report site only has data on reported deer car crashes. In fact, one longtime county sheriff estimates that easily 50 to 75% of deer car crashes are not reported. The actual numbers are higher due to many drivers not reporting hitting a deer due to no vehicle damage coverage, large commercial trucks hitting them, and various other reasons. After 3 Piscataquis County Sheriff cruisers had over $7,000 in damage due to deer car crashes in the winter of 2018-2019, they have installed these cow catchers on the cruisers. A truck driver with 36 years history of driving 500,000 miles on Route 23 between Guilford and Newport will attest that the deer situation on Route 23 has changed drastically over the years due to winter deer feeding. When he first began driving the route in 1983, once the snow depth reached a certain level, he would no longer see deer along the route until the spring thaw. In the last couple of decades, it has become a gauntlet of winter deer crossings due to so many people now feeding deer. The deer crossings are not due to changes in natural food sources. They are the direct result of people feeding deer in their yards. This past week alone, the end of December 2019, beginning of January 2020, there were 5 deer that he noted being hit in Guilford, 3 in Sangerville on 23, and 1 in North Dexter on Route 23. Let's look at the potential deer population growth rate over time. This chart was taken from a study from Ann Arbor, Michigan. This does not include any deaths. It includes any doe and her female offspring only. So you see year 0, you got a doe and a lamb. By year 5, you're looking at lots of deer. So if you take that and apply that to these areas where the deer are getting hit, if we just take those numbers and let's say 50% of them are does and lambs, which I feel that is a higher percentage are actually does and lambs, but we'll take 50%. If we just take those figures, in 15 years, that's 1,824 deer that were never born because these deer were killed by cars because people were feeding them. On 23 in Sangerville, the north end, you had 56 road kills from 2003 to 2018. 2003 to 2018 on the south end, 66 road kills. If we use those numbers, we would be talking thousands of deer that were never born. Here's a map looking at the deer wintering areas in the state of Maine. I zoomed in and pulled out the Dexter-Sangerville area. As you can see, I've circled in red Lake Wasakeg, which you see on the far either end, the green spots. Those are 2 wintering deer areas that would sustain deer, as along mainstream as well. I have indicated Route 23, which shows very little green area, showing proper winter habitat. These are the migration routes of several of the radio-collared does that travel from miles away to winter at feeding sites in Dexter alone. Does killed during the winter will not be returning to their summer ranges and giving birth to offspring in these areas. Road kills due to winter deer feeding have a significant impact on the population of a large area. If you look at the first map on the upper left, 27.7 miles that doe travels from her wintering area in Dexter and her summering area in between Bald Mountain and Shirley. You look at some of these others, 6 miles, and you're another 20 miles. Kingsbury to Dexter, Parkman to Dexter. Any deer that are killed during the winter are not going back to their summer ranges and giving birth. So those deer never learn these areas. There's no offspring going. The following slides are short videos from 2 different trail cameras that were set up at 2 crossings in Dexter. Notice the traffic going by in each video. In this short clip, you see the deer heading towards the road. The road is up there in the dark on the higher elevation. You'll see headlights going by, more deer rushing up. As they pause and listen, there go some cars. This is the same location during day. A couple of deer are running for the road. If you don't happen to catch a car going by, the video stops prior to that. The deer is being cautious, but it is quite a hill there for them to go up. This one, the deer have just come across the road, facing the camera. They've stopped. There's cars coming down the road, as you can see in the background. There goes one. They kind of panic a little bit. Another one comes by. They survived that. Here comes another one bursting across the road as cars go flying down at 50, 55 miles an hour. Very busy road. This doe watches traffic go by and listening, waiting, hopefully for a safe time to cross. The snowbank that she has to climb out there is 6 feet above road level, so once she tops that and goes down over it, she will be at a full trot. The Brownville deer car crash map, the bottom left shows the red X showing the Brownville food pantry with the surrounding high impact area in the yellow. The map, the chart, on the right shows just 6 reports from 2018, 2019 that shows Those car crashes were all during the winter months, just showing that it does have an impact. This was a study done on the topic of whether to feed deer in the winter. Is it a helpful thing to do? It turns out it isn't. It can lead to habitat destruction through overbrowsing of local vegetation and can attract predators, increase disease transmission, increase aggression among deer as they vie for food, and reduce fat stores as deer travel to and from these feeding locations. If you feel you must do something to help deer winter over, then plant native forage that they would normally eat. Supplemental feeding might seem like a quick fix, but it turns out it isn't a fix at all. This radio-collared doe has dual citizenship. She spends her summers in Quebec, winters in Maine. In Quebec, she is just 150 miles from a chronic wasting disease case that broke out. Close contact and crowding typically seen among winter deer feeding sites can greatly accelerate the spread of infectious diseases like CWD. Because of the long incubation period for CWD, an outbreak among white-tailed deer at feeding sites may spread to a large area long before clinically ill individuals are observed. This would greatly hamper efforts to control the disease. Discontinuing the practice of winter deer feeding makes great sense as a measure to prevent the spread of chronic wasting disease. Auto insurance claims. Data that I collected from a single Maine insurance company claims department shows claims from deer car crashes between December 15th and April 15th from 2012 until February 28, 2019 total $1.9 million. The average deer car crash cost $3,200 in damages. Based on the Maine DOT crash report query tool, a very high percent of deer car crashes occur near winter deer feeding sites. Should insurance companies and ultimately auto owners, due to increased premiums, shoulder the burden of these costs? Thoughts from a retired inland fisheries and wildlife head deer biologist, Jerry Levine. Jerry notes that deer car crash mortalities may be preventing local populations from growing or remaining stable, despite feeding efforts preventing starvation. Deer car losses at feeding sites may also result in lower numbers of any deer permits as IF&W tries to balance overall doe losses. My note to him was the hard part is that many of these deer aren't local, shown by the radio collared. They migrate as far from further north, and I was surprised to see that several were traveling from 20 plus miles away. So it must happen more often than I had ever thought. So in the long run, this is affecting populations further north, is it not? Jerry's reply is, you are right about the scope of the impact. He would have never predicted deer fed in Dexter had migrated from this far. Makes one wonder, did the deer start migrating to Dexter because deer wintering areas 20 miles away were cut or otherwise altered? My personal opinion is no, because I have been in the woods where these deer, some of these radio-collared deer, summer, and there are plenty of cedar swamps, and the cedar has never been browsed by deer. Jerry also thinks that I am right about the deer car collisions. There was a time that he wanted to use roadkills as an index to population size, but realized that non-reporting rate was too large and variable for an index to be useful. It remains true today. Also, around the time they made the video in 2000 on winter deer feeding, wardens were logging about 80 roadkills each winter along a 4-mile stretch of Route 201 near the Forks. There is still a problem there today. Here's the results of an online survey I created to get a better understanding of the overall scope of winter deer feeding. Do you think winter deer feeding is beneficial to the overall herd? I had 44 people answer. 43% said yes. 56% said no. Do you feed deer in winter? One person skipped it, so 43 answered, 41% yes, 58% no. If you do feed deer, on average, how many deer each year? 22 people answered, 22 skipped. 0 to 5 was 27%, 5 to 15 deer was 54%, and 20 plus deer was 18%. How much money do you spend on deer feed per year? 19 people answered. $100 to $200 was 52%, $250 to $500, 31%, $1,000 plus dollars, 15%. How close is your feeding site to the nearest busy road? 19 answered. Less than half a mile was 47%. More than a half a mile but under a mile is 31%. And more than a mile from a busy road was 21%. Do your neighbors also feed deer? 35 answered. 34% yes. 65% said no. Would you still feed deer if there was an application and permit fee to better control where deer are fed for the safety of deer and motorists? 31% answered. 35% said yes. 64% said no. If you feed deer now, would you consider stopping the practice if you learned it actually is hurting the overall herd more than it is helping it? 28 people answered. 53% said yes, they would. 21 said no. 25% said maybe. What did the survey show us? The people who feed deer think they are helping the overall herd. The average person feeds 5 to 15 deer and spends under $200 a winter, so that's not enough food for 5 to 15 deer through the winter, so they're not even doing it properly. 80% of those feeding locations are less than a mile from a busy road, and nearly 50% of that is less than half a mile. 64.5% of those feeding would stop feeding if there was a permit fee. Only 53.5% would stop if they learned that feeding was doing more harm than good. Shouldn't that number be 100%? What are the problems with feeding deer? Poorly placed deer feeding locations, improper food offered in many cases, especially corn, once they've gone to a cedar browsing diet, a disorganized array of people who feed deer, millions of dollars in damage to automobiles, injuries to drivers, overbrowsing of the area, deer gathered in inadequate wintering areas, predation at feeding sites, spread of disease, generations of deer that don't know how to yard up naturally. How can we fix this problem? Education. That's what I've done with the hours that I put into this study, doing the research to give you the information, to try to show you that it has a large impact on our deer herd when you have these areas that are being fed. They're not in good areas. People are hitting deer. These deer are not producing the next year, and it just multiplies. And I truly believe that our deer herd is being decimated by winter deer feeding. I think that we should do some type of implementation of a permit system for those who want to feed deer in order to keep the feeding locations in appropriate areas. The wardens can look this over. It's going to be more work for the warden service. They do have control to stop people now, but there's thousands of people out there that are feeding deer that don't even have a clue what they're doing. Some of these places, I know way up north, they have some studies that they're doing, and they're feeding them properly, naturally, preferably away from roads. But in the central Maine area where I live, it's rampant, and it is decimating our deer herd. And I think that we should charge those who feed without a permit a fine for endangering deer and motorists. These are just some of the things that we can do. And hopefully this study that I put together has given you some insight onto where I stand on the issue, what I feel is happening. I'm not trying to point anybody out. I'm trying to point out that our deer herd is being hurt from winter deer feeding. And I do believe that the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife should stop this practice and ban it, really. That's my opinion. But unfortunately, at this point, if we did that, thousands of deer are going to die from starvation because they don't know how to yard up at this point. It needs to be phased out gradually over time. But these smaller locations that are doing it, it's got to be put under control. And I appreciate your time, and hopefully you gain something from this. Thanks for watching.